To hear from David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And I'm going to follow on a bit from my colleague Moana Maki and talk about evidence. Because the assumption is that when you pass legislation, you do it for a reason, because there's something wrong, because you want to improve things, because there's a problem there. So when I look at part one, where it looks at the sickie, the idea of the sickie, I want to pick up where Moana Maki left off and say, well, look at the survey that was done. Look at the survey that was done of workers and taking of sick leave in New Zealand in 2009. 593 employers surveyed, 38,000 employees, and what did they find? That in a 12-month period, the average amount of sick day taken was 4.6 days. Does that sound excessive? 4.6 days. Is this a problem? Why are we putting through this legislation when there is simply no problem? This is about ideology. This is about playing to one's friends. This is about making a pretense or trying to create some sort of an illusion that this government has a plan for productivity. Productivity, Mr Chair, in New Zealand is one of the lowest. In labour productivity in New Zealand is one of the lowest in the world. In fact, I think it's the second to lowest in the OECD. It's one above Iceland. We work hard in New Zealand. We work harder for hours worked than just about anybody in the OECD. This is not about trying to penalise people further for taking the odd sick day because they need to. It's about ideology. Now, if it was about evidence, one would, and we wanted to try and look at evidence to support this legislation, then what we would expect it was to hear from the Department of Labour, from Stats New Zealand, from the ACC, but we haven't. We don't have data for that. We would hope to hear a regulatory statement from the Department of Labour. This is something that the ACT Party and Rodney Hyde was very adamant about. He wanted to see regulations, or the regulatory statement for all legislation that was going through Parliament. We didn't even give the Department of Labour the chance to give or offer any advice on this legislation. So I go back to the point. Evidence, a plan. It's not a plan. There is no evidence. It is simply, as I say before, it is simply ideology of this government. And in the case of the sick leave, Mr Chair, it's actually not even workable. Fancy taking out the phrase reasonable grounds out of the legislation. What is the problem? As Moana Maki just said, if the employer suspects an employee of rorting a system, they have the ability to actually bring up that employee and ask for a medical certificate. They have reasonable grounds. We take that reasonable grounds out, and every employer can ask any employee at any time to have to come up with a medical certificate within 3 days. Imagine the issues of having to going to a medical centre or a doctor in order to get that. Even Peter Dunn, who is supporting the government, as he normally does, but supporting the national government at this time, even Peter Dunn is saying that is unworkable. And then to sit in this House, Mr Chair, and hear Roger Douglas talk about the 40-hour, talking about the right of choice, takes me. You could go back 100 years and hear the same speech from employers or people in this House saying, why do workers have to have a 40-hour week? Why can't they have the choice to work an extra 10 or 20 or 30 hours? And on that logic, why give the option of only 1 week's holiday? Why not 4 weeks holiday so they just continue to work through? There is no logic, and it shows no understanding of the power relations between an employer and an employee. This, Mr Chair, is a piece of legislation that is not based on evidence. It is not based on any logic. It's based on ideology. It's based on the fact that we want to try and pretend that there is a plan, that we want to try and pretend that we want to try and make New Zealand more productive, and all we want to do is really take away the rights of people who don't have the right to say no. And I'm tired of sitting here in this House, Mr Chair, and hearing ideology rammed down our throat as a plan.
I call Louise Upston.
I move